This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome! I'm Carissa Sluss, an assistant editor at Cast of Wonders and your host for today. Episode 405. Our story for today is from the editorial page of the Falchester Weekly Review by Marie Brennan. Marie Brennan is a former anthropologist and folklorist who shamelessly pillages her academic fields for material. She most recently misapplied her professor's hard work to Turning Darkness into Light, a sequel to the Hugo Award-nominated Victorian adventure series, The Memoirs of Lady Trent. She is the author of the doppelganger duology of Warrior and Witch, the urban fantasies Lies and Prophecy and Chains and Memory, the Onyx Court historical fantasy series, the Verikai novels, and nearly 60 short stories, as well as the New World series of world-building guides. Together with fellow author Alec Helms, she is the author of the upcoming Rook and Rose epic fantasy trilogy, which will be published under the joint name of M.A. Carrick. This story is narrated by Catherine Inskip, Alistair Stewart, and Jeremy Carter. Catherine Inskip is the editor for Cast of Wonders. She teaches astrophysics for a living and spends her spare time populating the universe with worlds of her own. You can find more of her stories and poems at Motherboard, The Dune Steve, Luna Station Quarterly, Abyss and Apex, and forthcoming from Polu Texni. Hugo Award-nominated Alistair Stewart is a genre fiction writer and pop culture analyst. His nonfiction has been published by Tor.com, Uncanny Magazine, and Barnes & Noble. He is an ENE-nominated tabletop RPG writer for his work on Doctor Who Adventures in Time and Space. His other RPG writing includes Star Trek, The Laundry Files, Primeval, Victoriana, All Flesh Must Be Eaten, NEW, and Chill, meaning he's got a playbook for any variety of invasion you can name. His most recent game work is the forthcoming After the War, from Genesis of Legend. Alistair co-owns the Escape Artists Podcast Network and hosts their horror show Pseudopod. His most recent publication is the Pseudopod Tapes Volume 2, Approach with Caution, the second collection of expanded essays from the show. His short stories can be found in the Fox Pockets anthology series from Fox Spirit, among other places. He lives in the UK with the love of his life and their ever-expanding herd of microphones. Follow him on Twitter as @AlistairStewart. Sign up for his weekly pop culture newsletter, The Full Lid, or check out his reviews and blog, The Man of Words. Jeremy Carter has produced audio for the Dune Steve audio fiction magazine, Far-Fetched Fables, The Journey Into podcast, and Starship Sofa, in addition to Cast of Wonders. By day, he teaches physics and maths in the beautiful Peak District. He is a husband, father, photographer, cook, and very occasional runner. And now, we've a tale to tell.
From the editorial page of the Falchester Weekly Review by Marie Brennan. Narrated by Catherine Inskip and Alistair Stewart and Jeremy Carter. Dear Sirs, I was fascinated by Mr. Benjamin Talbot's brief notice, published in the 28th Seminus issue of your magazine, detailing his acquisition of a preserved specimen from a heretofore undocumented draconic species. As we all know, legends of the cockatrice date back many centuries, but I am unaware of any reputable examples collected before now, either dead or alive. This is a thrilling event for the field of dragon naturalism, and I heartily encourage Mr. Talbot to publish his discovery at greater length, including details such as the manner of its acquisition, the island or archipelago in the Broken Sea where such beasts may be found, and a thorough description of its anatomy. An engraving to accompany this article would not go amiss, though naturally a public presentation of his find would be even more desirable. I may dare hope that Mr. Talbot is even now preparing such an article for publication, whether in your magazine or elsewhere, for I have awaited further information with bated breath and fear I will soon turn blue for lack of oxygen. I am, as always, your devoted reader, Mrs. Isabella Camhurst.
Dear Sirs, I will beg your leave to respond to Mrs. Camhurst through the medium of your pages, for she has addressed me publicly, and as such deserves a public reply, lest I leave your readers in unnecessary suspense. I assure Mrs. Camhurst that my cockatrice will be made public in due course. I am making arrangements, even now, for its display, which will begin on the 21st Calorus in Mertic Square, with admission quite reasonably priced. I hope that she understands my reticence in saying more about its place of origin. The appetite for such curiosities is insatiable, and were I to make public the name of the island where this specimen was collected, hunters might flock to its shores, and the population would soon be reduced to a fraction of its current number. Mrs. Camhurst, having expressed tender sentiment for the well-being of dragons on previous occasions, I trust that her feminine heart will understand my concerns, and not begrudge me this measure of caution. Your obedient servant, Mr. Benjamin Talbot.
Dear Sirs, I thank Mr. Talbot for his solicitous attention to the well-being of both cockatrices and my feminine heart, but I had hoped for rather more specific an answer. To explain my position, as some of your readers may know, I recently returned to Scotland following extensive travels around the world, including a lengthy sojourn in the Broken Sea. I do not claim to have visited every island in that region, a feat I am not certain any human can honestly say he has achieved. But my ship called at multiple ports in both the Melatan and Poyen regions, and in all these places I made no secret of my interest in creatures of even faintly draconic nature. I studied everything from sea serpents to fire lizards to the so-called Komodo dragons of Sinkarbao, which proved not to be dragons at all, but nowhere in my travels did anyone say anything to me of a creature resembling the legendary cockatrice. Given the distance between here and the Broken Sea, and the unsuitability of any part of the cockatrice for use in ladies' fashion, I cannot imagine that hunters would make terribly large inroads on the population there, but there may be scholars who would wish to study them in their natural habitat, and for such individuals the name of the island would be tremendously useful. Elsewise, they must search throughout the Broken Sea for this creature, crossing off their list only those islands I myself visited, where I am certain no cockatrices are to be found. Regardless, I look forward to Mr. Talbot's public presentation of his specimen, which I will be very interested to inspect at the earliest possible opportunity. Yours in intellectual curiosity, Mrs. Isabella Camhurst.
Dear Sirs, it was with some dismay that I opened the 29th Florist issue of your magazine to find another letter from Mrs. Camhurst gracing its pages. Although her enthusiasm is remarkable, I begin to feel that she is using your publication as a forum for some kind of campaign against me, which might better have been carried out in private correspondence. I am, of course, aware of the expedition to the Broken Sea last year, led by my esteemed colleague from the Philosopher's Colloquium, Mr. Thomas Wilker. I do not think, however, that Mrs. Camhurst's role in that expedition qualifies her to offer an authoritative opinion on the full complement of draconic species in the region. A fact she herself admits, though she does not let this hinder her from offering such an opinion regardless. Indeed, many of the stories we have of her actions during that expedition are anything but scholarly in nature. In light of this, I can understand Mrs. Camhurst's enthusiasm for pursuing the origins of my cockatrice. Were she able to persuade anyone to fund her travels, she might return to the Broken Sea and see the creatures for herself. But I regret to say there is an unfortunate air of grasping ambition about her persistence on this topic, as if she wishes to claim the position of authority regarding this species for herself. Perhaps Mrs. Camhurst is unaware of the courtesies practised among gentlemen and scholars, which dissuade us from poaching one another's discoveries. If so, then I hope this reply will make them clear and bring this matter to a long overdue close. Your obedient servant, Mr. Benjamin Talbot, F.P.C.
Dear Sirs, I pray you forgive me the tone of this letter, which, although addressed to you, is in reply to Mr. Talbot, and is crafted for that audience. I note that Mr. Talbot chose to sign his second reply, printed in the 5 Graminis issue of your magazine, with his credentials as a Fellow of the Philosopher's Colloquium. Being a lady, I of course have not been admitted to the ranks of that venerable institution. But I like to think that my publications speak for themselves on the question of my scholarly achievements. I believe the publications that earned Mr. Talbot his fellowship in the colloquium were on the topic of geology, though of course this does not completely invalidate his observations in the field of dragon naturalism. As for Mr. Talbot's comment regarding my actions during the voyage of the Basilisk, I choose to interpret that as a reference to the events in Kionga. For surely a gentleman of Mr. Talbot's stature would not slander me by alluding to the scurrilous and unfounded rumours which have circulated regarding my private life and interactions with the men around me. I must, however, correct Mr. Talbot's misapprehension concerning one of those men. He named Thomas Wilker as the leader of our expedition. You will note my use of the plural pronoun there, which I employ with deliberate precision. The expedition was a joint endeavour between Mr. Wilker and myself, in both its planning and its execution. Any who doubt this matter are invited to submit their doubts to Mr. Wilker himself, who will soon set them straight. He may even, I dare say, do so politely. Furthermore, I should like it to be known that I made several attempts to contact Mr. Talbot by more private means, but, having received no reply, found myself with no other option but to address him in the pages of your esteemed publication, in the hopes that I might meet with better luck here. If he wishes to avoid public debate in the future, I suggest he inquire into the reliability of his servants, or perhaps of the Falchester Postal Service, to discover why it is that my letters have apparently not reached his breakfast table. I am certain there can be no other explanation for why my previous queries went unanswered. With these matters out of the way, let me speak bluntly. It seems exceedingly peculiar to me that the cockatrice, which is well known in Ethiopian legend these past 1,000 years, should be found on an obscure island in the Broken Sea, quite on the other side of the world. Mr. Talbot has not yet advanced any explanation for how our ancestors of the 5th millennium knew of such a creature, when trade even to the nearer reaches of Iriga or Darjen was uncommon and carried out only with difficulty, nor for why it seems to be unknown in the legends of lands closer to its natural range. Furthermore, while there are branches of the draconic family in which feathers are known, the Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan of southern Orthole are of course the most famous, but to them I may add the drake flies I discovered during my expedition with Mr. Wilker to Bayembe and Moulin. A cockatrice strikes me as a rather different matter. I know of no true dragon or draconic cousin that exhibits both scales and feathers, and I must say that I find so hybrid a creature unlikely in the extreme. I do not, of course, accuse Mr. Talbot of deception. Rather, let us say that I must, with reluctance, consider the possibility that he himself has been deceived. That the man who provided him with his specimen, a man, I will note, who has not yet been identified to the public, was either a charlatan or himself the gull of one such. The scholarly community has been subjected to hoaxes before, and no doubt will be again. That Mr. Talbot should consider my interest in this matter to be tantamount to poaching is not only insulting, but indicative of a dismayingly proprietary attitude towards scientific knowledge. Our wisdom grows not by staking out claims and defending them against all comers, but by sharing information freely, so that we may work together for the betterment of all. I would gladly cede all credit for the discovery and study of the cockatrice to Mr. Talbot, if only I trusted him to proceed with integrity. Yours in regret, Mrs. Isabella Camhurst.
Dear Sirs, I will keep my reply brief, as Mrs. Camhurst's vendetta against me has already occupied too much of your publication and the patience of your readers. I take the gravest exception to her accusations against me, and were this the previous century, and she a gentleman, I would not hesitate to call her out. As it stands, I can see no productive end to this debate, and to further engage her would only be to validate her pretensions to scientific authority. This will be the last that you or your readers will hear from me on the matter. Mr. Benjamin Talbot, F.P.C.
Dear Sirs, I was delighted to read last week's leading article, A Cockatrice Story, 30 Calorus. I had followed with interest Mrs. Camhurst's debate with Mr. Talbot in previous issues, and so it was gratifying to see the conclusion of that tale featured in your publication. I only regret that the name of the man who sold the specimen to Mr. Talbot is still unknown, as any fellow who can convincingly graft the head of a parrot onto the body of an immature wyvern must be very skilled at taxidermy, and I should like to put such talents to more reputable ends. But I thank Mrs. Camhurst for her indefatigable pursuit of the truth, and commend her dedication in disguising herself to attend the opening of Mr. Talbot's exhibit, despite his very public opposition to her presence. While I am certain that a lady scholar of her stature has no need of financial assistance, I am taking up a collection to reimburse her for the costs incurred by admission to the exhibit and her subsequent arrest, as a measure of public gratitude. Any who wish to contribute may write to me at No. 14, Harwater Street in Falchester. Your servant, Mr. William Penberg.
I'll confess to having a weakness for historical stories, real or fantastical, about women stubbornly refusing to demur, especially when those stories are told with a bit of biting humor. A self-determined woman, Isabella is confident in her wisdom and knowledge, so much so that she's compelled to pursue those truths, making sure they are revealed, even to her own detriment. That's my kind of hero. Set in an alternate world based on our own 19th century, the Memoirs of Lady Trent are a 5-book series by today's author, Marie Brennan, chronicling the adventures and discoveries of Isabella, Lady Trent, renowned dragon naturalist. Today's story is set in the same world, so if you enjoyed it as much as I did, you should check out the rest of the novels in this series. There are links in Marie's bio. Join us again next week for episode 406, The Hammer Royal Model for Making the Superhero A-List by Jason Kimball. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Our Patreon is so very close to break-even level for the industry standard rate of 8 cents per word, and we'd love to be able to pay our narrators more than token payments, and our associate editors anything at all. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on our Patreon Discord server, the EA Forum, forum.escapeartist.net, or visit on Twitter @Cast of Wonders. Come say hello. Cast of Wonders is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip and assistant editors Andrew K. Ho and me, Carissa Sluss. Associate editors Amy Brennan, Alicia Caparasso, William Haight Minor, Umaira Hussein, Sean Proctor, Ray O, Susie Rodriguez, and Emma Smales. Audio producer Jeremy Carter. Our art director is Alexis Goebel, and our community manager is Danny Daly. Our episodes are released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music, Appeal to Heavens, is by Alexei Nov and available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening.